What does it really take to be a powerful leader as an engineering professional? We come from a technical background. Can we make that transition successfully? Yes, we can. And in today's episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, I have with me Kerryn Fulton, President and CEO of CS Davidson. And Kerryn's going to talk about her transition from an engineer and how she was recognized by her firm and then supported to become ultimately the CEO of the firm. But first, a word from our sponsor, Tensar.
Check out Tensar Plus,
the award-winning design software for construction professionals to design with geosynthetics and calculate their value on projects. Tensar Plus is simple to use with a powerful engineering system at its core. It leverages our decades of research and experience with soils all over the world, so you can count on your solutions working the first time, even in the most difficult conditions. Whether you're designing a crane pad or need to build a temporary road over muck, the cost, time, and carbon savings can be calculated, making comparison with alternatives simple. Specs, reports, and product data can be generated for your design, and training resources, research, and our third-party expert reviews are all provided conveniently in the software if needed. Usable both online and offline, the app is available in browser and on all major mobile platforms. Whatever you're working on, Tensar Plus is your toolbox for success.
All right, so now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Kerryn Fulton is the President and CEO at CS Davidson. Kerryn, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
No, we're happy to have you. Glad that you're taking the time. And want to start off by maybe you can walk our audience through your journey with CS Davidson from your start as an engineer back in 2001 to becoming the CEO in 2016 and kind of how that journey shaped your leadership style.
Sure, absolutely. So like you said, I came here in 2001, and that was when I was right on the cusp of sitting for my PE exam. So I was still pretty young in my engineering career at that point. I came to CS Davidson because I was primarily interested in just really honing my structural engineering skills. My goal was to design commercial structures, work on big commercial structures. That's what I wanted to do. And CS Davidson gave me that opportunity. And so once I got here, I sat for my PE exam. I started working on all of these great projects. And before too long, I wasn't just a structural designer, but I was promoted to a project manager position at CS Davidson, which meant that I wasn't just responsible for designing, but I was also responsible for managing and leading teams of people to help get projects done. So that was perhaps my first little step into learning what it takes to manage and lead other people. So that was what I did throughout much of the 2000 era, or decade, if I should say. Toward the end of that decade, there was another big series of changes that happened that really shaped my development as a leader. One was we went through a big internal change at CS Davidson. The president made the decision to completely reorganize the company, which I think was something we needed to do. But the other thing that happened toward the end of the decade, as we all know, is there was a very big economic downturn. And of course, that particular recession really impacted the civil engineering industry. And so with those two events happening at the same time, it probably was not the best timing in the world. And so things were not good at the company. And so things seemed very dark and dreary and morale was down. And so, whenever I see something that isn't working right, I feel really compelled to try to fix it, or, I can't really sit back and just let things happen. And so I started to see opportunities where I thought we could make things better at the company. And so that's whenever I started being invited to the leadership table with senior leadership, was because I was kind of a voice of positivity during a tough time at the company. And so there again, that's what sort of got my foot in the door for rising to more of a leadership position, corporate leadership position. And then it just sort of took off from there. In those early years, again, 2009, 2010, I certainly made a lot of mistakes because I was pretty green from a corporate leadership perspective. But at the same time, I had the latitude to make mistakes because, it was really an unprecedented time for the company. So, that event really shaped my trajectory at CS Davidson. And then from there on, I became the chief operating officer in 2013, I believe it was. And that's whenever I, started overseeing all of the day-to-day operations of the company. And the final point I'll make is that that was also at the same time as when I started working with a leadership coach, which was another transformative experience for me as a leader, where I started working with somebody who really helped me hone and refine and become, sort of a master of leadership skills, if you will.
That's awesome. And I definitely want to dig a little deeper on a couple of those points. But before I do that, just for our audience's information, CS Davidson, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been in business now for about 100 years, started as a small surveying firm and has blossomed into a multidisciplined civil engineering firm located in Pennsylvania. That's correct.
That is all correct. And you're right on. 2023 is our 100th anniversary.
Okay, that's great. And just about roughly how many employees do you have now, Kerryn?
We're about 88 people today.
Okay, great. All right. So getting back to kind of what you said there, I think there's a couple important points. One of them being, I think as engineers, we're technical by background. I mean, that's obviously one of our strengths. But then when we want to make that transition to leadership, that obviously can pose a challenge. And, for you, it sounds like getting involved early on and having some opportunities to engage with other people and manage people and lead people and manage projects was certainly a good stepping point for you to kind of foray into the leadership realm. And one thing that you said, I think, is really important, because a lot of times people will say, oh gosh, an engineer going to a manager, that's kind of dangerous, right? Because we're very technically savvy. But I think the one benefit that you really mentioned is the ability to solve problems, right? Like you said, like you saw a problem, you wanted to solve it, you wanted to optimize it, you wanted to make it more efficient, which is why, in my opinion, if you can develop your leadership skills as an engineer, it really can make you a very dynamic leader, because you have the analytical and like problem solving side, right? That left brain ability. But if you can add that right brain to it, it's a very powerful combination. And, and I love the point about the leadership coaching as well, being an executive coach, being an engineer and an executive coach myself, I feel like one of the things that people kind of assume is that if you get a coach, that means you have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big misnomer in our industry. In fact, I think some of the most successful professionals get coaches to help them accentuate their strengths.
Correct. And I think an important point to make is that if you think of it from a sports standpoint, every athlete has a coach, right? It would be unheard of not to have a coach. So having a coach is certainly not to indicate that you're weak. If anything, you're being smart and you want to perfect your game. And that's what I'm always trying to do, is perfect my game.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. In fact, Michael Jordan has said several times that there's no way he would have been as successful as he was without having like Phil Jackson, a great coach, coaching him and guiding him through his career. So even the best athletes in the world will not be as successful without someone there to guide them, help them, especially with new experiences and challenges that we're going to deal with every day as professionals. So It's good to hear that. And, because I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are civil engineers that want to be successful, that want to grow into a leadership position. I think the other thing that's important kind of to note about what you said there for our listeners is that it's clear that you didn't come in saying, hey, I want to be the CEO.
Right.
Like, you wanted to solve problems, you notified problems, you spoke up about those potential solutions, and your company recognized that and, invested in you and gave you opportunities to grow as a leader. And I think that's important for engineers to think about. You don't have to necessarily have a goal to become a high-level executive leader. You can just do your job really well, provide value, and see like where your career path kind of takes you.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. And I would simply say, what you always have to be doing is looking to see if there's an opportunity to stretch yourself a little bit, stretch out of your comfort zone a bit. And you just never know which direction that's going to take you.
Yeah, for sure. And so you mentioned that you became the COO first, of course. Talk a little bit about your perspectives on leadership and how they may have evolved from your transition from COO to CEO, especially in the context of leading an employee-owned firm, with a rich history that's obviously been operating for a long time.
Yeah. So, um, yeah, that's a big question. So when I was, chief operating officer, I felt like and I did have a very wide umbrella of authority. My job was to oversee the day-to-day operations of the company, which was the majority of the company. And so that's not just quality control, but that's, also personnel management, all kind, I was leading a team of the mid-level managers and so on and so forth. I was surprised when I became the CEO. I naively felt that, well, becoming the CEO shouldn't be that big of a change because I've already have a very wide umbrella of responsibilities. The umbrella can't get a lot wider than that, right? And I was surprised at that's a big step. And whenever you're overseeing a portion of the company, you could just kind of, look at that through sort of a limited lens and say, okay, marketing's not my problem. Recruiting's not really my problem. When you're the CEO, it's all your problem.
Mm.
It doesn't mean I do all of those things single-handedly, of course, but you know, there's nowhere else to turn to say, somebody else should be working on that. Like I need to make sure everybody's working on what they need to be working on in order to further the objectives of the firm. I don't know if I have a great answer for you in terms of how my leadership perspective might have been shaped or changed as CEO. From the perspective of leading and managing a company with a rich history and employee owned. I mean, we've been through this employee ownership transition at CS Davidson. That actually began when I first started at the company, so that sort of felt very familiar to me. But what I definitely gained a greater appreciation for is the long history, especially as we're now in our 100th anniversary, is that, looking back through the history of the company and appreciating just how far we've come and what a fantastic company this is and how we've been able to navigate change and roll with the punches through the years. We have a certain resiliency here, and I really have gained such an appreciation for that.
That's awesome. No, that's great. And I like what you said about, it's kind of all your problems as the CEO. At EMI, we do a lot of project management training. And in fact, I was doing a session yesterday on project tracking. And one of the things that we tell PMs is like, as a PM, you're the CEO of your projects, right? And so, you have to monitor the scope, the schedule, the budgeting, the client satisfaction. And it's like when there's a red flag in any one of those areas, you need to recognize it and you need to try to help address it, right? Because you are the project manager. And I think as a CEO of a firm that's at the higher level, right? You're responsible for all the departments and all the divisions. Mm-hmm. And if something's happening in HR, you need to get a red flag. You need to go and talk to them and see how you can help them solve that problem.
Exactly.
Right. And so it's very similar. And I think it is, an interesting difference from a COO where you're very focused on the operations of the company. The CEO, you're kind of looking at that global landscape, mm-hmm. if you will, of the company and trying to make sure that everything is moving in the right direction.
Right. That's exactly correct.
So, Kerryn, the field of engineering is certainly evolving in terms of gender diversity. My wife is a civil engineer, so we've had a lot of conversations about this over the years. What initiatives have you implemented or plan to implement at CS Davidson to foster kind of greater inclusivity in that regard?
Sure. So I think a lot of it does come down to culture of the firm. And I will fully admit I'm a little spoiled because I came into a company that already really empowered women. And again, this goes back to our history, our 100-year history. And we could spend an entire podcast just talking about the history of what came before me. But I came to a company that actually had women in leadership positions. They were more behind the scenes. But, Linda Davidson, Dave Davidson's wife, she was in a leadership position. Dave's mother, she was very much in a leadership position at the board level. So I came into a company that already embraced some gender diversity. One of the big things that's really helped me to succeed as a woman at CS Davidson in particular is that we have a policy here where this is getting a little technical and in the weeds, but I think it's worth it. At CS Davidson, you are considered a full-time employee if you work 30 or more hours per week. So the minimum threshold to be a full-time employee and maintain your full-time benefits, 30 hours. Why is that important, especially for, say, a female engineer who wants to be a new mom? Okay. I was able to take advantage of that whenever I started having kids in 2006, because I saw that there was this policy in place where I could work, stay home a couple days a week, yet maintain my professional career and maintain my full-time benefits. So I was really able to take advantage of an already existing emphasis on finding the right work-life balance. And I think that is so critical for really trying to make it a welcoming environment, especially for women who are looking to become, raise a family or whatever the situation may be.
Yeah, that's great. I really like that a lot. We're doing some work with a firm right now and some training around like well-being and burnout and thinking of that for everybody. And I think like you said, a little thing like 30 hours a week is a big thing for a lot of people. And thinking about all those little things here and there will add up to very big things around your culture and the kind of culture that you're promoting throughout your organization. And again, we can spend a whole episode talking about culture, but the one definition or the term that I've heard someone use recently around culture, which I really like, is it's how someone feels about working in your organization.
Right. Absolutely.
So, making people feel good about being there, making people feel like, hey, they want to come to work, they love working with the people they work with, is really one kind of big picture way to think about your culture.
Absolutely. The other, I think, kind of important point to make here is that it's one thing to have the right policies in place. It's another thing to make sure that people feel like it's okay to work within the confines of those policies. So while I took advantage of that 30-hour a week policy, it was the people who I worked with that made it okay for me to take advantage of that. I wasn't looked down upon for deciding to scale back just a little bit. And I think so that's really speaking to where the culture needs to dovetail in with good policy. Those two things need to work together in order to make it truly effective.
Yeah, it's a great point, because a policy is a policy, but if people are afraid to adhere to it, it doesn't really mean anything.
Correct.
And you're right, 100%. That's the leaders in the organization speaking to people and the way they speak to people and the way they talk about these policies. Hey, I really want you to make sure you're taking advantage of this and taking time for yourself. Saying things like that in conversations is really important. And, I think over the long term, it's just beneficial to everybody, right? And I think like one example is I have a friend who works for a company, like a tech company, and they have this vacation policy, which is like unlimited vacation days, take them whenever you want.
Right.
And the challenge with that is it sounds great, but if people are like, oh, I'm afraid to take off for whatever reason, because we have a deadline, I can't take off, I don't want to do it, then effectively it's really, to me, it's almost like I'd rather know that I have 2 weeks off or whatever it is and plan those weeks and take them, as opposed to just saying, geez, is someone going to be mad if I take a week off here? Just like, because we have it.
I couldn't agree more. Those unlimited opportunities sound great in theory, but I think it's more important to be really clear, being clear with expectations and definitions. And I'm so glad you brought up the vacation point, because I really strongly stress to all staff, when you're on vacation, be on vacation. Don't work while you're on vacation. Now it's a work from anywhere environment.
Yeah.
Don't work while you're on vacation. Take the time off, recharge, come back ready to go. I think that I drill that into people all the time.
Yeah, no, I mean, our organization at EMI is relatively small, and we've worked remotely over the years, but I always like to have an office to go to. I try to rent a place, because I told my wife, I want to go somewhere to work and then come home. Otherwise it becomes very challenging, and you can really work like whenever you want. It's almost like a mindset.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Like at the end of the day, I'm done, I'm going to go home.
Right.
Whereas, I feel like over COVID and a lot more people working at home, that became really we already had blurred the lines between work and home, but then we completely eliminated that.
Exactly. And that's been a tough thing. And when it comes to burnout, I think the separation is so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So another question I have for you, which I think is a really important one in today's day and age, is as a leader, kind of how do you balance the necessity for innovation and risk-taking, right? With maintaining stability and consistency, because especially where we're in this field of engineering where precision and reliability are so important, you're seeing new tech software for civil engineering firms. Every day there's a new software that pops up, right? So how do you balance that by, you want to stay innovative, you want to stay cutting edge, but at the same time, you want to keep working, you don't want to overcomplicate things, there's risks involved. Sure. Talk to me about your approach on that.
Small experiments. We're always engaged in small experiments. So I'm sure you've heard of, Jim Collins, the author who's written, Good to Great and those books. And one of his, I forget which book he wrote this in, but he talked about fire bullets first, then cannonballs. And I love that. And we subscribe to that quite a bit at CS Davidson. So a good example of that is, go back long ago, 10 to 15 years ago, when Google Maps were kind of a new thing. I mean, it seems like it's always been here, but it was a pretty new technology back, 15 years ago, or newer. And I had some staff who were really interested in figuring out how to, how do we leverage Google Maps and maybe do a little bit of software coding so that maybe we could leverage, asset management with Google Maps without having to use an expensive Esri package, for GIS. And so, we started with a bunch of small experiments with our bridge program, and that sort of evolved over time. And suddenly one day we were ready to launch the Cannonball, which was to take to market our own proprietary software program, right? That does asset management, map-based asset management program. And we launched that, and it's done incredibly well for us. But that didn't happen as a result of several of us sitting around a strategic planning table saying, hey, we ought to develop our own proprietary software program. It didn't happen like that. It happened as a result of a number of successful small experiments that just started to snowball, if you will. And so I think that's how innovation can be almost seamlessly integrated into, especially a civil engineering company. Look at where there's opportunities to try out little things and then see where that takes you. That's the approach I like to take.
Yeah, I like that a lot. What I like about that is it requires patience in a world of like 150 miles an hour that everyone's going at.
Right.
So you have to kind of say, hey, this software might help us like really improve our profits and make our place a better place to work. But, we're not going to just flip the switch on, invest in this big fee, spend a lot of money and put it in place. Let's try it out. Let's have a couple people test it, maybe take a couple months, reflect on it,
exactly.
let them report back,
yep.
right? And then make a decision. And I think I think generally speaking, just in business, that's just a good approach because there's a lot of shiny objects out there that we can constantly chase down if we really want to.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And I want to, I sort of was saying in jest that we didn't make this decision around a strategic planning table. We did have a strategic plan, and we did have a goal to develop something, so I'm not saying that we lacked vision, but the way we got to achieving that vision was by first starting with the small experiments. And I think that that's kind of an important distinction. It's okay, especially for engineers, I like to emphasize when you're doing strategic planning, it's okay if you don't have it all figured out from day one. You have to figure it out as you go, especially when it comes to big overarching goals. And that's kind of how you get there, I think, is that you sort of get a fuzzy idea of where you want to go, and then you conduct these experiments and you figure out the best path to get there.
Yeah, I think that's great. And just for a simplistic example, it's like, hey, we know our goal this year is to get more involved in tech, right?
Mm-hmm.
In technology and more innovative. We don't quite know how we're going to do that yet. We're going to try some stuff. We're going to meet on it regularly. And ultimately, an asset management program is the result of that.
You got it.
Putting yourself on the right lane in the highway, if you will,
yep.
Which I think is interesting because I think that's also an analogy for one's career, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, I want to be a leader in the engineering world. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to lead, who I'm going to lead, how big the teams are going to be, the types of projects, but I know I want to get in that direction. So I should really start working on my people skills, my project management skills, and then you'll evolve. You don't have to have all the answers from like day one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think that's a good thing for everyone here just to keep in mind. So we talked a little bit about women in engineering before, and I want to go back to that again. We just started a Women in Engineering podcast, and it's really, really been received well in the industry. And really the point of it was to say, we know that there are challenges for women in engineering still today, but we can talk to some women that have been successful and they can share their stories, and that might help you build your confidence and have some ideas, as a woman in engineering. So that being said, how does CS Davidson address kind of the challenge of retaining women engineers? I mean, you talked a little bit about some of the benefits and things of that nature, but it's a huge issue for our industry today in helping women to grow and retain them in your organization. I don't know if there's anything else that you can speak on that outside of what you talked about before with the benefits.
Yeah, it's a tough one because, I was reflecting on this one here recently, and I mean, the reality is we're not starting with an overwhelmingly large pool of female candidates, unfortunately, and I don't know the current statistics on that, but I, I think the last time I checked, the number of people who graduated, the number of women who graduated with bachelor degrees in engineering, something like 22% or something like that. And, so you're not starting with the biggest pool to begin with. So, it's really tough to actually even bring a female candidate in the door. And then it's really important to retain them. So yes, I already spoke about the need, putting those policies and the culture, bringing those together to make sure that we have a supportive environment. The big thing here, I think, for women, the challenge they face is I think there's a bit of what we call imposter syndrome, okay, where women don't necessarily feel like they belong in engineering. And I think creating that sense of belonging is so important. Am I an expert on being able to, give you great advice of how you do that? I don't know how you just sort of foster a team environment where everybody is there working toward the same common goal. And it doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter your ethnicity. You just sort of create an overarching sense of belonging for everybody who works there. Everybody's part of the team. And I think that that's the best way for you to retain, the underrepresented classifications of people in this industry.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? Because I think at the end of the day, and I know a lot of people in engineering in all different walks of life and cultures and backgrounds, and I don't think people are looking for an advantage, or to be given something. They're looking for equality, and they're looking for the same opportunity as everybody else. So I think what you said there is important, is that, it's embracing your entire workforce, bringing them together so that they can collaborate, they can work together, and they're all kind of on the same level.
Right. Exactly.
I think that's an important part of it.
Yep.
So following up on that, one of the things that you said was that, you're starting with just a smaller pool, of course, of women in engineering. And I know you're involved with an organization, Young Thinkers of York,
yes,
and you're really committed to inspiring young girls in the STEM fields. Can you talk a little bit about your initiatives and kind of, why this is something that's really important to you personally?
Yeah, it's simple. It's actually pretty simple. I mean, I wish that I had more time to spend on it, honestly. I mean, I go into not just Young Thinkers of York, but, I go to the college level, I go to the high school level whenever I have the opportunity to do so. It is a very simple strategy, and it's simply to show, if I can do this as a woman, you can do this, So it's really nothing more grandiose than that in terms of the messaging. But, it's just fun to engage and, see what little sparks you can light up there. And I've had it happen where I've gone and spoken to one group, and then years down the road I have an intern standing at my desk, a summer intern, saying, "Hey, I saw you speak, and that's why I'm here." And I tell you, there's nothing more rewarding than that.
That's great. And I think it's a very important thing, just getting engineering in front of younger people. I mean, I have a daughter who's in high school right now, and I know a lot of times people will say, like, at the high school level, it's too late, but I disagree with that, because,
right,
my daughter is a senior, and I'm talking to a lot of her friends, and like I would say 75% of them don't know what they want to do in their life yet, nor should they. I mean, they're 17 years old. I mean, you're not going to map your life out at 17 years old. But the point being is that a lot of times they hear the word engineering, and there's a lot of assumptions around it. Hey, it means I got to be an A+++ student in math, and I'm not, so I don't think I can be an engineer. And so I think getting out there and showing them what engineers really do is very beneficial. Like we participated in a STEM event for one of our clients that brought in 150 high school students in Illinois. And we had them do an activity of designing a site, like general terms, like a building, where do you want to put the parking lot? You have to think about the water, and they loved it. They came up with awesome ideas. So I think just getting out there and exposing the younger generation to real engineering, right? So it's more than just what people tell them is, hey, if you're good in math and you're good in science, go into engineering. Right. Well, you also got to be very creative. You got to be able to solve problems. Like, there are other aspects of it. So I think as many leaders like yourself that we can get out there speaking to the next generation is really important. Right. They need to understand what engineering is, because it's exciting and it could be a real great career for them.
Absolutely. Yep. I couldn't agree more.
So we talked before a little bit about, work stress right?
Mm-hmm.
Burnout, the idea that there isn't really lines anymore between work and home.
Yeah.
What strategies or policies have you implemented at CS Davidson to ensure that healthy work-life balance for employees, considering this really demanding nature of our profession?
Yeah. So I think one of the really important things is that the leaders of the company aren't just talking the talk, they're walking the talk. Okay. So, um, I personally make sure that I keep a healthy balance because I'm raising a family too. And
Yeah.
I refuse to let this job be all consuming. And as we all know, being a CEO of a firm, it can very much be an all consuming position. I will not let that happen. And I've said that from day one. I won't let that happen. So if I'm not going to let it happen to me, I sure as heck am not going to let that happen to my staff. And so I think it begins with how I model it, how my senior leadership team models it, and how we talk about it. Um, and like I said earlier, I really encourage people take your vacation and seriously, and I will tell them this as they're walking past my office, seriously, you're on vacation, enjoy that. Please, I don't want to hear from you. I don't want you checking emails. So we just keep stressing that. The other big one is sick days. If you're sick, go home and be sick. It's like, I don't know what this mentality is about. Somehow you're toughing it out and that makes you, really a better employee. It doesn't. So I can't tell you the number of people I will say, you need to go home now. So,
Right.
so, so I don't know if I might have drifted from your initial question, but it's to me, in order to keep that balance in check, it's the leadership has to walk the talk, and we just have to keep reminding people, don't let this consume you. Go be with your family. Go do your activity, do your hobbies. That's so important. It makes you. We want them to have a richer life, right? We want them to have a
Sure.
well-rounded life. I want to be successful as a firm, but I don't think we're successful if we have miserable staff, right? So
Yeah,
we
for
want
sure.
happy, well-rounded staff.
It's a great point, and I really like the point that you made. It goes back to what we talked about earlier with the unlimited vacation time and such. If the CEO, if the leaders in the firm are not taking care of themselves, you're basically telling people that you don't need to take care of yourself.
Right.
You don't need to take vacation, right? Without saying it, right? Because you're setting the model of what people are going to kind of act like, right? They're going to mimic their leadership in a lot of ways, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's super important that you lead by example, not just when you're talking about doing your work, but getting out of work and taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
And it's great that you do that. And I think for everyone out there, I think that means being really explicit and intentional, even in your conversations with your team members. Like, hey, when are you going on vacation? What are you doing with your family? What are you going to do over the holidays? Like, so that people understand that you're thinking about them personally as well.
Absolutely.
It's really, really important. All right. So, in your opinion, what role would you say empathy plays in effective leadership, especially when you're managing a team in a very technical and analytical field like engineering?
Yeah. So empathy, this is a great question. So to me, and empathy means different things to different people, but I think what you're asking me is, about how important is it to really have a good grasp on this part of the soft skill set. Like soft skill set, when I say soft skills, I'm talking about communication skills, I'm talking about conflict resolution. There's a whole part about understanding moods and emotions, right? Understanding human moods and emotions. And I think that is a critically important leadership skill. And I think that is something that carries through to all levels of management and leadership in the organization. And so, again, we're talking about people skills. At the end of the day, it's people skills. And so it's understanding moods and emotions, how to recognize them, how to verbalize an emotion, right? That's a whole study unto itself, is being able to say, I'm feeling frustrated about this situation. What does frustration mean? Right? Or, I could go on and on about different examples there, but I think that there's a whole study that it should be devoted. You could devote yourself to a whole study of moods and emotions, which then leads to being proficient and having the proper amount of empathy for others to allow them to work and work well, and to be able to recognize when they're having a tough situation, and when to push, when to push them a little bit and when to back off. And I think that is, again, just another critical leadership skill.
Yeah, no, I think that's
Yeah.
great. And I think one thing that I like to do to help with this is start with personal first. So if you're in a staff meeting, hey, how's everyone doing? How are your families doing? What'd you do this weekend type of thing, right? Just because it's just being human.
Right. Absolutely.
Before you jump in and say, hey, let's take a look at the plans. Let's take a look at the specs. Let's So I think keeping that in mind and making that a constant part of your relationship with them is important, because then they know that it's not just a one-sided, everything is focused around business relationship.
Right. And I think that those relationships, I love what you just said there. The relationships are formed, the interpersonal relationships are formed sitting around in the meeting before the meeting starts, or sitting around after the meeting is over, and having just those little connections go a long, long way, especially when it comes to conflict resolution down the road, right? Conflict resolution is a lot easier to get through when you've already established that personal relationship at another point in time.
Yeah, 100%. It's really, like someone told me on a podcast interview I did once, he used a great phrase. He said, leadership is people.
Yeah.
Right. I think that sums it up in like 3 words, right?
Right.
It's important.
Yep.
All right. So last question, Kerryn, what advice would you offer young women aspiring to pursue a career in engineering or leadership roles within the industry based on, all of your experience and insights to date?
Yeah. I think the number one key, or at least the one that made all the difference for me, was making sure that I surrounded myself with the right people. So I think it starts out as a young engineer, just starting out, find a good mentor. Find somebody who's willing to spend time with you and is willing to take the time to teach you, because, when you come out of college, you might have a lot of good basic skills under your belt, but in terms of how you put that into practice, that's a whole other refinement of skills. So I think finding the right teachers and mentors are so, so important. And honestly, and I had this conversation recently with a young lady in college. She didn't have a great intern experience and she really felt alienated. And I said, I think what this is telling you is that you're working at the wrong place. There are a lot of workplaces out there and there's a lot of demand for engineers. So if that's not working out and you just aren't feeling connected with somebody there to help you out, I suggest you find another internship, find somewhere else to work, because there are people out there that are willing to teach and mentor. So I think that is probably the big thing. Again, we've talked about culture multiple times here, but I also think that finding the right fit, the right culture, you just kind of know it when you see it. When you're working there, you get a good vibe, and you feel well supported. You feel like the right culture means that you're not feeling like you have to cover your butt all the time, that somebody's coming after you. You should be feeling like you're supported, and it's okay to make a mistake every once in a while. So I think, I'm just talking about culture in general. So that makes for a good workplace for everybody. But I think that women in particular need to make sure that they're looking for the right fit. Because again, if it's not exactly the right fit, then I think women can unfortunately find themselves in a situation where they're just trying to focus on being perfect and making sure that they never make a mistake, because you gotta force yourself to fit in, and I think it's a give and take relationship.
Yeah, that's great. And there are a lot of organizations and ways to find other women today. A lot of the professional associations have specific groups. Society of Women Engineers and others are out there as well, where you can really find these mentors and surround yourself with people, just like Kerryn's saying. So that's great. All right. Well, Kerryn Fulton, President and CEO of CS Davidson. Kerryn, thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Civil Engineering CEO. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been fun. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Kerryn. I really, really loved what she talked about in terms of a technical professional and making that transition and taking some initial steps, but ultimately providing value to the point where your firm recognizes you as a future leader and supports you and helps to pave the way for you to be able to become that successful leader. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to our channel here. We do put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.